This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to talk to the president of the Institute of Technology in Singapore. I'm not going to introduce you any more than being Professor Chua. And I want you to tell me about your journey as a learner and a leader from both your discipline as being an engineer, but also being a relatively new president of a very new and interesting institution. So, as they say, over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you very much for asking me to join you in this podcast. Well, I've gone into engineering because, like many people in my era, there wasn't a real understanding of what career we wanted to go into at that time. I was good in mathematics, I was good in science, and naturally in high school I did double maths and physics and chemistry. What I knew at that time was I didn't want to be a medical doctor. So engineering was the next best thing because in my part of the world there were a lot of developments going on, and unlike in my time, I think one of the things that we all wanted to do was to get a job as quickly as possible after school, and so engineering presented the most opportunities, and so it was fairly natural to go into engineering. But to be very honest, I didn't really know what field of engineering I wanted to get into. And so when I first went to university, I was lucky enough to get into the second year of a 4-year course. And at that time, the only places available was in civil engineering. So I got into civil engineering. And the first week of civil engineering, I did geology. And the lab was filled with all kinds of rocks and so on, which we had to, talk about describe, how it felt and all kinds of properties. And it really brought me to tears. So, so then I consulted somebody and I said, the electronics seems to be a major industry in Singapore. And so I said, I want to get into electrical engineering. And so I went to talk to the head of department, electrical engineering. And he said that, well, we don't have, our places were all full, but if you are the only one who wants to make the switch, I can make an exception. And so I went into electrical engineering, and the rest is history. So I was not particularly athletic. So I focused quite a lot on my academics, and, it was, undergraduate years was relatively smooth sailing. When I came back after graduating, I came to Singapore looking for a job, but that was 1985, and there was a big recession, so I couldn't get a job at that time. And so I did the next best thing, which was to get a scholarship, and went to the National University of Singapore to do a master's degree. And that was how I was introduced to research. And it was kind of interesting. The idea was actually suggested to me by my supervisor at that time, but I did all the analysis and the studies and so on, and we published a few papers. That time research was very new in Singapore, but it was a good taste. And then when the opportunity came for me to get a scholarship back to my alma mater in New Zealand to do a PhD, I went ahead. Partly because I was quite interested in an academic career at that time. But, knowing that universities generally do not take their own graduates, I went away to do a PhD. And after I graduated with a PhD, it was quite refreshing in the sense that when I did my PhD, I was pretty much left alone to do my own stuff. So quite different from my master's, where the idea was suggested by my supervisor. PhD, I had to look for things on my own. And I think that in retrospect, looking in hindsight, I think that was pretty good training rather than to be given a topic and just producing the solution, because I did spend quite an amount of time looking for the problem. And I think that prepared me fairly well as an academic. And when I was completing my PhD, I came back to Singapore and I got a job in the university, and I've been with the university ever since. Not a very
Please.
remarkable journey, but I think it was quite okay.
So which university in New Zealand did you do your PhD?
Auckland, University of Auckland.
Auckland.
Yeah.
So what was it like in the 80s to be an international student in New Zealand?
It was very nice. New Zealand at that time, I know the people were very welcoming. It was a very nice environment. As I said, I was pretty much left alone by my supervisor. And I had a lot of freedom to explore the topics and so on. And at that time, I think one of the key things was I specialized in telecommunication. So in telecommunication, it was moving away from just the old telephony network, but to support data and other stuff. And I think it was, really just an emerging field in that sense, multimedia. And I did my initial research there, which I took back when I joined the National University of Singapore to carry on in that field. But New Zealand was a very nice place. It was quiet, very, very quiet. The shops closed at 5. Weekend was really quiet, but it was a good place to study.
Did you pick up an interest in rugby and cricket, given that New Zealanders are great rugby players and cricket players?
I did pick up and know about the game of rugby, but I could never understand cricket to this day.
It was yesterday I had a conversation with one of your colleagues, as I said earlier, and he mentioned that all of the deans or vice chancellors, presidents of the universities in Singapore are graduates of NUS.
Graduates, or well, in a sense,
that they worked.
Yes,
they either
yes,
worked at
yes.
NUS or
Yes.
they've done some of their study at
We've
NUS.
done some,
Yeah,
Each of
yeah.
us have done some studies, whether it is bachelor's, master's, or PhD.
Yeah.
In the university, yes. I mean,
So just
expected because NUS is the mothership.
And I noticed, I looked up the Times rankings today of university reputations, and NUS is right up there within, certainly the top 50.
Yes, I think if you look at the ranking, I think NUS has risen remarkably, rapidly. I think, I think in the last, if you look at ranking, a lot of it is due to research. And, when I first joined the university in 1990, it was pretty much a British type teaching university, NUS. It started, at that time, the government started to have, 5-year research plans and so on. And it was just the start around 1990s. And so I remember when I joined the university, it was very easy to get grants. I mean, not in large amounts, but, a couple of $100,000. Very, very easy. Nobody wanted grants. All you have to do is to write a proposal and you get some money.
So when you think about your university, which is a very different university from NUS, it's really a university about applied learning.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what your university is like, and more particularly, what a graduate of your university can expect on graduation.
Yeah. No, so a bit of context, right? In Singapore, there are 5 polytechnics, and the polytechnics are pre-university institutions, but the diplomas can be considered terminating diplomas, in the sense that a polytechnic graduate could go out to the workforce. In the engineering field, they would work perhaps as associate engineers, for example. But in Singapore, as in many Asian societies, everybody wants a university degree. And I think if you look at the pay difference between a polytechnic graduate and a university graduate, I think that explains why. Now, in the earlier years, when NUS and NTU were the 2 major universities in Singapore, many of the polytechnic graduates could not enter university and they had to go overseas. So SIT was established in 2019, not as an autonomous university, but as an institution of higher learning. And I call it an aggregator in the sense that we were representing foreign universities in offering Singaporeans foreign university degrees. And so it was established as a pathway, if you like, for polytechnic graduates who aspire to have a university degree. And 5 years later, through an act of parliament, we became Singapore's 5th autonomous university. And with that, we started developing our own degree programs. And we also started working with overseas university partners to convert quite a lot of their original degree programs to joint degree programs with SIT. These degree programs are said to be campus blind in the sense that they're meant to be similar to what is offered in the overseas universities' home institutions, home campuses. But of course, we also wanted a flavor of what SIT wants as a University of Applied Learning. And what does it mean by a University of Applied Learning? It is really preparing our graduates to be work ready, career ready, industry ready, whatever term you want to use. But, for me, it is about how we actually meet the manpower or the talent needs of Singapore's industry. So we have a very, very specific focus. And so the university is quite different from NUS, where I spent almost 30 years today, because as you said, NUS is highly ranked today, very research intensive. Whereas SIT, as a University of Applied Learning, we focus very much on preparing our students to be work ready.
So what then does that mean in terms of pedagogy and in terms of student experience?
Yeah. Now, so since I joined the university, I've been quite careful in really telling my colleagues that SIT is not a vocational institution. It is a university. And by a university, I mean that, the education that we give our students has to be holistic, in the sense that it is not just focused on getting a job. I think the phrase I would like to use when I describe SIT students is that they should hit the ground running when they graduate, meaning when they go into the workforce, they should, on day one, be able to do exactly what the company expects them to do, rather than the company having to spend another 6 to 12 months training them to be effective. So that's the differentiation that, I told my colleagues I want out of SIT graduates from the NUS, NTU graduates, for example. But, having prepared them to that extent, it is not about just providing them with the knowledge and skills to do the work. We also have to prepare them to be lifelong learners, given that, there are so many disruptions in industry today, right? And so the education we want to give them, I call them a holistic education, because we also need to give them what I call transferable skills that, will prepare them for what I call a lifetime of careers, not a career of a lifetime, right?
Yep.
So they will have to have multiple jobs. And today we said that, it's probably about 12, 15 jobs in one's lifetime. And so what are the skills and traits, characteristics, for example, habits that the students need to learn when they're at university? And these are transferable skills. Some people call them soft skills, but we call them transferable skills. Critical thinking, communication, being able to work as a team, in a team, being today, digital technology is so pervasive, understanding how digital technology affects society and so on. So these are skills, transferable skills that we also embed into our education in SIT. So if you think about it, it is no different from the general education that most universities offer their students. But we also try to do it quite differently, in the sense that we try to contextualize these transferable skills in the disciplinary knowledge or disciplinary courses that the students take. So in a sense that, when we look at, say, for example, critical thinking or communication, how do we embed it into, say, a course in mechanical engineering? What are some of the modules in mechanical engineering where there are opportunities for us to really teach the students to think more critically or to present better? Now, what this means is that in SIT, what we have to do is to bring two professors together to do a course. Say, for example, with the communication, I need a communication expert to come in and work with a mechanical engineer to actually design that module so that, that module actually holistically merge the two together, rather than I say, you do a comms course in general education. After that, it's not contextualized and you forget about it. So this way, we think that, these transferable skills can be introduced to the students over the 3 or 4 years they are with us, rather than in just one semester of a 3 or 4 year course, right? So, and it also contextualizes it to the degree that the student reads, so that, we think that it's easier for the student to appreciate and understand and use, rather than, it being taught in isolation. Yeah. So our education is shaping to be quite different. The pedagogy is quite different. Of course, the pedagogy emphasizes two things: active learning, which, uses experiential learning, because I fundamentally think that if you want to be a lifelong learner, you have to be an active learner. You must develop the habit to be, actively inquiring about things and so on. If you're a passive learner, chances are, you won't be a lifelong learner. And the other thing that is very different from us is that our learning environment, we try to make it as authentic as possible. So for us, an authentic learning environment is something that is very close to what industry is like, because we are training them to, go into the industry. And so what we do is we try to therefore establish very close linkages with industry. The problem statements that my students work on are industry problems rather than textbook problems. So be it the attachment, or be it the capstone, or even a team project, we source the problems from industry for our students to work on. So one of the advantages I feel doing that is that the students are trained to appreciate that there is no one ideal solution to the problem. It depends on what constraints you face and so on. So that in a way also prepares them, better prepares them for work when they graduate.
So what I'm hearing you say is that your graduates are marked by being active learners, good problem solvers, effective communicators.
Yes.
Anything else?
They also have to be. So we have 4 DNAs that we want our students to develop, so to speak. So we call them citizen DNA. Citizen starts with an S to play on the SIT acronym, right? So for citizens DNA, one is what we call a thinking tinkerer. Somebody who is able to do things with their hands, but not just with their hands, but being able to think. So a thinking tinkerer is one of the key DNAs. The second DNA is to be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? The third DNA is to be a catalyst for transformation, because we want them to go into a company and try to help the company move up the innovation value chain and be a catalyst for transformation. And the fourth DNA is to be grounded in the community. So we want our students to actually be useful citizens to work in the community, and they're grounded in the community. So actually, the other thing that we do quite a lot today is service learning, right? So we look at the community also as part of the industry, right? As a stakeholder. And we actually do have teams of students. Every student now have to do a social innovation project to graduate. And that social innovation project is to go into the community to solve one problem. And increasingly, we are also sending students to the region, to the neighboring countries, Indonesia, Laos, Thailand, and so on, to do service learning, this social innovation project. Yeah. So for citizen DNA defines our graduates.
That sounds very exciting and very different. And do you think that because you're a relatively young university and not bound by history and tradition, you actually had that flexibility and that elasticity to do things that were different, but not only different, quite transformational?
We do. And in fact, we want to do more of the things that, are not done traditionally in universities, to be bound by that. One example, for example, we just passed 10 years as an autonomous university last year, and we are in the process of finalizing our next 10-year plans. So one of the things that we plan, where we want to take the university in the next 10 years, the tagline is Singapore's University for Industry. I think that's quite obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I'm personally very excited about is this whole idea of the university as a platform. The university as a platform, both for education as well as for research and innovation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do I mean by that? Well, SIT will continue to be a small university, not of the size of NUS, for example. And, very early on, because of the way we bootstrap using our, overseas university partners. So this whole idea of how do we leverage others to achieve our mission, is something that SIT wants to do more of. So this whole idea of a platform of education. So who will be our stakeholders? Who will be the participants in this platform? It can be other institutions, whether local or foreign. It can be industry, right? And so our stakeholders are our students, whether undergraduate or graduate or adult learners, or even our alumni coming back to upskill and reskill. So how do we provide that education for them? Well, of course, through SIT's own academic staff and so on, but we can't cover everything. So is there opportunity for us to reach out to our partner universities, to institutions overseas and local, even to edX, Coursera, and so on? Can we then, take their contents, work with them to provide that education to, our learners? Now, in order to do that, we have actually started to move into this whole micro-credential space in a fairly large way. Mm-hmm. And when we look at micro-credentials, we are actually moving away from the traditional ways in which universities scaffold learning. They scaffold learning through horizontal, through multiple years, right? First year, you do the fundamentals, second year, you build up, and so on. Now, the problem with that is that a learner is not equipped to do any useful work until year 3 or year 4. So what we have done is, with the micro-credential, we've turned it the other way around and vertically stack it, so that each micro-credential is a standalone piece, that when you complete the micro-credential, you can, be proficient enough to do some work in a new area. So for example, if I want to be a network engineer, I think that's a field that is most familiar to me. If you want to be a network engineer, if I want to learn about network security, can I complete a micro-credential and be competent enough to go and do a job in network security, right? And of course, there will be different levels of competencies needed. Then I can do multiple micro-credentials to reach up to the level of competency. But we have finished the first, most basic one. I should be able to do some work in the industry. So I'm flipping it the other way around. And the advantage of doing that is that each of these micro-credentials can be quite self-contained, that I can leverage on others to help me do it. So we've also changed, our curriculum in that sense to prepare us to be a platform, right? And the same thing with innovation. Can we be a platform if a company wants a solution? Today, the problem is this. Company goes to a university, and the university says, I'm fantastic in material science, for example. I can give you, my research results on material science, but that results is still very, very far from what the industry can use, because there's still a whole lot of engineering needed to take the basic research to application. Now, with innovation platform, can I then leverage again, the different participants on the platform to provide a real solution to the company, right? So again, I think, it's quite different from traditional universities, because traditional universities wants to do everything themselves. So we are very open to collaboration. We are very open to having people join the platform and so on.
So if I walked around your campus, and I've been to Singapore a number of times, but invariably I went to NUS or NTU. What would I see? What would be the images? What would stand out for me about your students? What would stand out for me about how they congregate together and how they work together?
Yeah. So my students, if you come to the university, I think we've just moved to our new campus in Punggol. In the past, we've operated out of 6 locations. So we started August last year, first phase of the move, which will complete by May this year. And we are actually embedded in a business park, really, really embedded in a business park. It's called the Punggol Digital District. If you come here, you'll find that right in the middle, there is a campus boulevard, pedestrianized. And on the right side is the SIT campus. On the left side is the companies in the different buildings. And all the buildings, whether it is SIT building or the business park buildings, are connected at level 5 through a series of corridors and so on. And that allows, the free movement between the business and the university. And I think that's a very powerful arrangement, because today you come to any university in Singapore, each one is close to a business park, but not in the business park. Now, despite the distance being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers, it's still a barrier. It's still necessary to drive there, because of the heat and so on. So it's still a barrier. Now here, for example, in the business park, I will have a major bank moving in a couple of years. And this major bank has now sponsored a business analytics lab in the university. And so, you can imagine between the bank's employees and our students, it's really, really tight working together. The bank people can come to the business analytics lab at any time. Our students can actually go to the offices of the bank to do technical work anytime. There's also a hotel that is being built in the business park. I have hospitality business students. They could be attending classes in this hour, the next hour, they could be actually working in the hotel. So I think that proximity actually makes it totally different from what other university students will experience. So, at steady state, you would see the really free mingling between business and SIT students and faculty. Really, really free mingling between the two. Yeah.
The last 2 years have been quite disrupted with technology, and in particular, AI. ChatGPT has fundamentally changed. At first, it was seen as this terrible threat. Now it's morphed into, here's an opportunity, and the next morphing will be something different. But at the core of it is questioning about how students learn, as opposed to focusing on productivity, getting things done quickly. Talk to me about your views about the opportunities that AI offers for your students, because your students are, as you say, applied, industry-based, and probably going to be right at the center of these transformations using technology.
Yeah. So I mean, as with every university, we were concerned about how students, would use AI. But I think in Singapore, I don't think any one of us, restricts the students' use of AI. But I think we go in the direction of basically trying to educate our students about, the use of AI, and we encourage our students to say, by all means, use AI as the first draft. But, not lock, stock, and barrel, just submit whatever the AI tells you, right, comes up with. So I think that's the education part is important. An ethics framework put in place is extremely important, which we have done. But in terms of opportunity, we see a lot of opportunity in AI. And our focus as a university is not to go deep into, AI technologies, AI science, and so on, but to apply AI. We see huge opportunity to enabling the application of AI in the different vertical domains. So for example, in construction, in the built environment, right? In food technology, right? So every single, in healthcare, every single vertical in which SIT has, some expertise, we are exploring the use of AI. And in fact, we are in the midst of setting up a center, an AI center, which is focused on application of AI rather than AI research. So we see huge opportunities in AI in that sense. Yeah.
I've got two questions, and then I'm going to end with a cheeky question. So the first question is, when you reflect back on your career, both as a leader and a learner, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think one advice I would really give to my younger self is, to really not to be overly cautious about opportunities when opportunities come knocking. I think in my earlier years, I was kind of cautious. I mean, I've had opportunities to, work overseas, very attractive positions and so on. But I was overly cautious that I did not take up. I mean, I don't know what my life would turn out if I had taken those opportunities. But, I've learned not to think about those, to move forward, not to regret about whatever decisions I've made. But subsequent opportunities that were in Singapore, I had taken advantage of that. For example, I mean, my 29, 30 years in NUS, out of that 29, 30 years, I spent, for example, about 5 years, almost 6 years, running a research center outside of NUS. I then spent about 2 years working for a private sector, helping them set up a research lab in Singapore. I then went to do 2 years as a bureaucrat, if you like. I was in the National Research Foundation when it first started in 2006, 2007. I spent 2 years there as a director of projects, coming up with new grants, structures, and so on. So I call surgeons outside of the university, not the regular professor who teaches and just do research in that sense, right? And I find that, that has actually shaped my career significantly because it's given me exposure to other things, right? And I've learned a lot out of those exposures. So I would advise my younger self to grab every opportunity that comes along and, just diversify the experience that I would get.
Would you, given, as you're talking, I'm thinking, you sound as though you're quite curious and something comes up and you think, that could be interesting. Have I made a correct assumption about you?
I think so. I've always been curious about things, and in a sense, I've also taken calculated risks. And I encourage my colleagues to take calculated risks. Of course, you don't take uncalculated risks, but not to be afraid, right? So for example, I give you one example. I mean, when I was working in the research institute, I was quite young. I was put in a leadership position at fairly early age. And I was working with a company that at that time, we are so used to Wi-Fi with, huge bandwidth today. But at that time, in the mid-90s, the rate which the Wi-Fi predecessor could transmit was 1 megabit per second. Yes, 1 million bits per second, which in today's context is super slow. And it was like a credit card size thing that you had to put into your device. And that 1 megabit per second was the maximum at that time. And this company challenged me and said, well, we are interested in 10 megabits per second. Could you do that? And I said, what technology would you do that? I said, well, the technology is quite simple. We just send multiple streams at 1 megabits per second. If you can send 10 streams, you get 10 megabits per second. I mean, that was a very simplified way of talking about it, but we had no technology capable of doing that. And I happened to then get to know an institute in Australia who was using that technology but for a different purpose, not to speed up the transmission, but for error correction redundancy. They were sending things up to the satellite. And so they were sending at lower speed, but they needed these multiple streams, in case one stream get corrupted, they got the other stream to back it up and so on. And it was a calculated risk. I sent a couple of my young, bright chaps there, learned the technology, came back, and we actually did that project with the company and learned and developed that skills. So if I were not taking calculated bets, I would say we don't have the technology and we don't learn, So I keep telling my colleagues, sometimes you have to take that risk, right? And, otherwise you will never improve, right? I mean, my earlier work when I was doing mobile multimedia was very, very early, to the extent that, it attracted the top Japanese companies to come and work with us because we were really at the forefront of working mobile multimedia. Today, we take for granted, right? Our phone can do live streaming and so on. But bear in mind, that was in the mid-1990s that we started working on that. So it was quite, in a sense, I mean, all these things intrigued me. And, I was kind of like a kid having all this ability to play with toys, and that's the beauty of being in a university environment, right?
So you've been to many graduations over the years, and in fact, I noticed as Dean of Engineering, you probably presided over many graduations over the years. So when you walk around your campus or go to graduations at SIT, what advice do you give to the students that are graduating?
That's the same advice that I give them. I mean, just grab whatever opportunities that come along, right? I mean, don't wait for the ideal job. There's no ideal job, right? I mean, you get out there, get a job, and you learn, I give them the same advice that I would give my younger self.
Look, my last cheeky question is, what are you reading?
I read today, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, I at this moment, I'm not reading any book. But I tend to like to read bios. And I also sometimes read about technology and so on. I mean, technology, most of the time I don't read books, I read the papers and magazines and so on, but not so much of books. But books, I generally like to read about bios and learn from, leaders in different fields, their lives. And so it's quite interesting read. Yeah. I think the latest book I read was Musings from Singapore's ex-foreign minister, George Yeo. Yeah. So it was a very interesting book that I read, Musings. Yeah. It's about the things that he, that he did when he was in political office and so on. So it's quite interesting.
Actually, I misled you. I do have one last question.
Yeah.
If we were to continue our conversation and I was to contact you in 2 years' time, what do you think we'd be talking about in terms of your university and the challenges facing higher education?
I think, we are in the midst of a major transformation in the university. I think, when I first joined SIT, many people thought I was going to make SIT like NUS. And I said that, it's really quite crazy. It will be suicidal, given the size of SIT, given, the age of SIT, given the resources that SIT has, and the way I said it, many people were quite amused, and they say, yeah. I said, in that space where NUS and even to a certain extent NTU occupy, research-intensive universities, in that space, there are two gorillas. There are two gorillas there. As a little monkey, you want to go and compete with them. You want to go to that space, you'll be killed in no time. So I keep telling my colleagues, what I want is to find a new space in which we can grow to be that gorilla, right? And I think that, we are lucky enough to be given that mandate as a University of Applied Learning. And I say that, let's grow SIT to be that premier University of Applied Learning and be that gorilla in that space, right? So there are many things that we need to do. The pedagogy needs to change, and I talked about micro-credential earlier on. The other big change that we are moving is in competency-based education. It is about not just transmitting knowledge to the students. It is about making sure that they have the right level of competence to apply the knowledge that they learn. So competency-based education is a major thing that we are, introducing into our education model, right? We are all learning at the same time. The assessment is completely different. The way you structure is completely different. And I'm telling my colleagues, your role is not a sage on the stage anymore. Your role is to be able to curate, and I talked about the platform idea earlier on. Your role is to be able to curate the materials and coach and guide the learners along the way. So you are becoming a coach, right? And a curator of knowledge rather than a sage on a stage. So that transformation is a major transformation. You can imagine that, my colleagues all come from traditional universities, and mindset change I think that's a huge transformation. Then the area of corporate governance, efficiency in a university, I think we are also undertaking a huge digital transformation of our business processes, policies, and systems, right? So I think SIT is really undergoing a major transformation in the next few years. And so I think 2 years may be a bit short, but hopefully, in 2030, if you come and visit us, we will be known as a premier University of Applied Learning and Singapore's University for Industry.
Professor, I have had the most delightful morning. Thank you for giving me your time. Your vision, your curiosity, your passion for learning has made my day. So I hope that you've also enjoyed our conversation, and perhaps one day I will come to your campus
Come and visit
say
us. Come
hello.
and visit us. Yeah, come and visit us and see for yourself how closely we work in industry, how involved our students are with industry and so on.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.